Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media here, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we have spearheaded a lot of issues in Canada and Manitoba, Canada. We've confronted the Prime Minister of Canada on several occasions, including about the carbon tax. Of course, about a year ago, I confronted Justin Trudeau. I ended up calling him a scumbag. It was a way to get the issue on national television and get the conversation going. I asked him, how do you justify people having to pick between feeding their family and heating their homes during the winter due to your carbon tax, which is a tax on everything. We've also spearheaded issues in Manitoba, Canada in past years with Premier Greg Selinger of the NDP. We were basically a thorn in his side for years. Well, look, it's time to continue to step up because no matter what party you vote for, it's always going to be the same agenda being pushed forward. And we see that in Manitoba with Premier Brian Pallister, who, the so-called conservative, it looks to me like he might actually be raising the carbon tax in Manitoba. So let's go into the facts quickly. The Manitoba carbon tax is a made in Manitoba solution. Of course, Pallister and Brad Wall were very vocal against it. And of course, Pallister had mentioned that he was willing to implement the carbon tax if there were certain healthcare benefits given to the Manitoba government from Ottawa. And you know, there's the creation of the Ministry of Sustainable Development in Manitoba as well, which was a little bit concerning, considering it's coming from the conservative, so-called conservative government. Now, here is the plan, the Made in Manitoba plan. $25 per tonne. Charges about 5 cents a litre on gas, just under 7 cents on diesel. Rakes in $248 million a year, starting with $143 million this year. The federal carbon tax is $10 a tonne on carbon dioxide emissions in 2018. That increased to $50 a tonne by 2022. For a year or two, Manitoba's so-called conservative premier, Brian Pallister, will be imposing a more hefty carbon tax than the federal government. What happened to no carbon tax or a cheaper Manitoba solution? On top of this, the province intends to use part of the money to create a $102 million conservation trust that would protect natural areas and also spend $40 million on a green fund intended to mitigate climate change. Pallister plans to raise all forms of taxes, a total of $118 million this year. He seems to be only making really unpopular cuts, like, you know, cutting hospital staff, etc. And moving on, it's kind of like a script. An official said the carbon tax on fossil fuels, which is slated to come into effect on September 1st, will be subject to GST and be applied on top of the existing fuel tax. Agricultural producers, commercial fishers, trappers, mining companies, and the forestry industry will be exempt, as will Winnipeg Fire Paramedic Service. Winnipeg Transit will not be exempt, meaning taxpayer money will be spent on paying taxes, if that makes any sense at all. Pallister promises to give money back to Manitobans through income tax relief and a 1% cut in the provincial sales tax by 2020. Meanwhile, it'll further monopolize major corporations at the hand of government and shove small businesses out of the market. It's a tax on absolutely everything, importing, exporting, etc. Manitoba debt is expected to reach $25 billion by the end of the coming fiscal year. The province has also gotten $350 million worth of transfers from Ottawa. Carbon taxes are supported by big banks and big political and corporate establishments. So it's important to mention that people are saying, you know, the carbon tax attacks the big corporations. It's like cutting off the head of the snake. No, in no way is it that. In fact, it creates greater monopolies by pushing the small businesses out and only allowing the major monopolies that can afford to pay it to rise up. And of course, it's a whole rich gets richer situation. And John is from Norway. And of course, in Norway, they implemented a carbon tax in 1992. And it did not work because carbon emissions went up. It's basically just another way to extort people and steal their money in order to spend it on crazy, inefficient things that the free market can do better. So John, you got the budget here. You got a lot of information here. What's going on? Is this so-called conservative just another wolf in sheep's clothing that is really pushing forward socialist, globalist agendas?
Well, I would say it's definitely the latter, the left. It's just a left-leaning, less left-leaning government, less socialistic government, but there's still like far on the left side, and which most governments are, Josh. Of course, we've talked about this several times.
Bigger government, the better, because they depend on the subservience of the populace.
Yeah, and you were talking about mentioning at the first of the video about the federal government giving more money towards healthcare and the province, and of course that's what have happened. They increased by $301 million the federal transfers, as they call them, where they take from other provinces that are richer than others and give to the poor. It's just another form of socialism, just on a bigger scale.
Let's also make mention of the fact that they aren't stealing from the rich and giving to the poor, which is still wrong. I mean, people should work their way up in life as individuals rather than collective coercion and gangs, these organized cartels that we call government. But it's them stealing from the poor and giving to the poor, which is always seems to be the case, which is in no way okay. And this idea that it's called fair is insane. And before you continue, John, I just want to mention one quick fact that I didn't mention before. Basically, the idea is that he's going to give all this relief by, lessening the PST, the sales tax, 1% by the year 2020. So is that good enough for you? I mean, when we're being taxed more on everything that we buy in the store, on top of the hidden tax of inflation that comes from printing currency out of thin air, they are going to lower the sales tax 1% by 2020. How is everyone not infuriated?
Well, talking about inflation is going to probably be 3-4 times higher than that at least over the next years. So why 1% is nobody's going to feel it. It's actually going to be way worse. So he needs to at least cut the sales tax 4, 5, 6, 7%.
Totally.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're for all taxes. Yeah. You know what we're all about here at WAM. But I want to talk about another number, which is the debt servicing, and that's only the interest. They don't pay of course, the principal, which is insane. If you were to go into debt, would you just go out and pay the interest only on your debt and never ever pay down the principal? Well, if you knew that you were never going to have to pay it down, well, of course you would. So that's, of course, now it's over $1 billion in costs just on the interest itself. And then, of course, the deficit is $521 million. So that's a huge thing that you're still in a deficit. They're still cleaning up after the NDP. In our last meeting with Pallister. Pallister was a very nice guy, but listen, we gotta have to do something here. We can't just tippy-toe and play around in economics and money and government anymore. The government system is falling apart here, and we need to see it. And we can't just play these games as things are gonna be okay. We need to take drastic solutions. It's not a carbon tax to save the environment. It's saving the people from the government.
And free market individual demand that really saves an environment historically when it comes down to people supporting that with their dollar, which they actually believe in. And of course, that is a great solution other than government trying to solve the problems of government. Let's remember, government is the biggest polluter on the planet. It also has killed more people than anything else on the planet. So when government steps in to save lives and save the environment, it's absolutely bogus. It's just another way for them to steal money from people. And look, you mentioned that we've met with Pallister, and look, he was a nice guy. In fact, when we dealt with Greg Selinger, he would literally run away to the point where we had to basically stalk him down and be like, look, this is wrong, and what do you have to say about this? And he would just
no answers.
Well, I got assaulted once. One of his guys actually threw me up against a wall and hit me in the throat, and it caused my voice to be gone for about a week. Anyway,
that was kind of his collapse of his elections anyways.
Yeah, that was after the debate. I asked him a question at the debate. Anyway, insane. But Pallister gave us some time. We saw him in the hallway. We stood there and we talked with him for a while, and we asked him, when are the cuts coming? Because during the elections, they were like, Pallister is running with scissors. It's so terrible. He's cutting things. Well, if you actually do cut things, we'd see a lot of prosperity in the free market, as long as you also look towards getting rid of the central bank. And
lowering the government.
Yeah, exactly. Lowering the amount of power the government has and the spending it has. But of course, he did talk like a politician, and he pushed it off, and he's like, well, it'll happen, just watch, just wait and see. And that apathy that people are expected to have towards government is absolutely insane, and that's why we end up with bigger collectivism growing all the time.
Yeah, walk your talk, take action now. It's so much bullshit from the government just talking. The big saying, walk your talk. Like, what does that apply to government and to politics? It doesn't. Nobody cares. I want to just quickly state, because the deficit is $521 million. But if you take the land transfer taxes, which is $4.496 billion on top of that, then you have above $5 billion in deficits. $5 billion in deficits. $5 billion in deficits, guys. That's crazy. Think about that. And nobody's talking about the land transfer. Oh, well, those are always going to be there, aren't they? We're always going to get money from the big Papa government or the federal government. No, there's so many warning signs here. And Josh was saying that it was, the total debt is going to hit about $25 billion by the end of the year. Well, I have a number for 2017-18, how much debt per capita we had here in Manitoba. And it's $18,086 per person that we have in debt, not to mention all the other private debt that is accumulating here because of issues of the monetary system, too high taxes, and so on. So people are accumulating mass amounts of debt all over the world, and especially here in Manitoba as well with, housing. Our housing is not as bad as Vancouver and Toronto, of course, but we are seeing way higher prices here in Manitoba compared to what we should have when it comes to our cost or how much people can afford. I'm going and seeing people that have the same or lesser income than me taking a house that's triple some or even quadruple sometimes the value of what I have in the mortgage. I'm saying, like, why are people doing this? This is insane. But they are thinking the same way, I believe, like the government is, that there's no accountability of going into debt, and eventually I guess we just got to print ourselves into prosperity.
Yeah, well, we have recently reported on the fact that the household debts just reached about 1.8 trillion with a T dollars in Canada. That's over $22,000 per person. And then, of course, on top of that, the Bank for International Settlements recently came out with a study saying that Canada is one of three countries or three economies in the world most at risk of a banking crisis, alongside China and Hong Kong, respectively. So it's important to mention this because we are heading in this direction where there's more and more poverty, the middle class is being destroyed, and we have these taxes coming in on top of that destroy business, destroy trade. So my message to Brian Pallister is, look, I know you're watching this because I know that you have a lot of the same ideas that we do, but you are letting pressure get to you. And when that pressure gets to you, that means that you aren't being effective. And when you aren't being effective, then your whole goal is pointless. You're there, but then you'll be gone, and then someone else will take your place, and they'll just continue along on that same road. So it's so important for you to be able to break free from popularity for the sake of efficiency. Now, I don't believe that government is going to be the solution to government. I believe free markets are the solution to government. I believe you, the individual, are the solution to government. But look, I really think that allowing that pressure to get to you is making you incredibly ineffective, and I ask you respectively to sit down and talk with us. If you're watching this, please sit down and talk with us. We'll have a conversation. We'll do an interview. Maybe you have a different idea of how this is all going to turn out, but people don't know that because you're not really getting out there and getting that message out. So if you have a reason for what you are currently doing, if you have a good reason and you want to sit down and talk about it, we are open to have a conversation. So email us, worldalternativemedia@gmail.com, and we will sit down. We'll come to your office or whatever you want to do, and we'll talk. But look, right now this doesn't look good, and if we continue on this path, we are heading to absolute poverty and the debt servitude that we are getting so used to in the world today, where you're shoved down that bottomless pit of debt and you're forced to ask for a ladder up from either the government or the banking system, which puts you into perfect servitude to them, exactly where they want you. And when it comes to the free market, okay, you're cutting certain things, Mr. Pallister, but they happen to be the most unpopular things you could possibly cut, and leaving the things that are really making them or being the most destructive, you're leaving all that in place, and that's a huge problem. So let's talk about it. Email us, get back to us, and we will sit down and we will clear the air if there's anything to be cleared. But if it is exactly what it seems to be, and you are basically raising the carbon tax for the time being, and Manitobans are going to be paying a lot more taxes, then well, you got another thing coming next election, and unfortunately, I really hope this isn't the case, but it's just going to go around in a circle again. They're going to elect Liberals or NDP and then go back to Conservatives and back and forth for eternity, and nothing's ever going to change.
Yeah, and we were talking about the sectors that's not going to get hit by the carbon tax. Well, it looks like it's a potential of implementing also a cap and trade system, which is a system where your emissions, you have to buy X amount, like the cost of what your emission is, and then that gets traded on platforms like Blood and Gore, which is like insane in the first place, but that's actually the company is called, where they trade some of the carbon credits, which is owned by Al Gore, and I forgot the name, the Blood something. Was the guy
some creepy person with the last name Blood.
Yeah, but anyways, so that's another thing that's a potential here, and it's just like this is the problem. We're creating so much government, and when you look at the government is increasing, but also taxation is increasing here at the same time. You're not even cutting, like at least Trump is cutting a little bit of taxes in the United States,
raising them on cryptocurrencies.
Yeah, but yeah, he's trying to actually cut, but again, like nobody's cutting government. Nobody's cutting government, and we're just going to have an ever-increasing government until the government becomes so big that it's bigger than the private sector. And this is a warning from Europe. Look at Greece, look at Italy, look at Spain, look at all these southern countries and also the northern countries now, how their governments are getting so big that they're above 50% of the total production in the world. And who is funding the government in the first place? It is the private sector. It's not supposed to be deficit spending. If you tax somebody, it's supposed to just be taxes. The government should never be able to borrow any money whatsoever.
Yeah, absolutely. And the private sector is involuntarily paying for it by the hand of theft and extortion by the hand of the government. But anyway, we'll continue to go into this. I think this is something that we have a global audience here at WHAM, and it's important that we get this message out to everyone because no one's really talking about Manitoba on a global scale, and I don't blame them. There's not that much to talk about, but when it comes down to this absolute theft, everyone was super excited about, Saskatchewan and Manitoba. They weren't going to implement the carbon tax. And then Trudeau, during the election, said we weren't force provinces. But then, of course, once he was prime minister, he's like, we are going to force them. You have until this date, until the end of 2018, to make up your mind on what your solution is. And if that doesn't work out, we are just forcing our federal carbon tax on you, which is basically a United Nations carbon tax going back to Agenda 2030.
It's the Paris Agreement. It's the Paris Agreement. That's where all this comes down from. It was made in Paris. Yeah.
It would cost about $200 per ton for them to reach that goal, apparently, at the United Nations for the 30% drop or so by the year 2030. But look, this is just another form of theft. It actually just benefits a global establishment and these big corporations.
It's the heck out of people as well. And then people is like, oh yeah, I'll throw all of my money at you. Save me, please. We can all die.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So they use a lot of fear mongering to push it forward, and it basically leads to the most impoverished people paying more for their macaroni and cheese that they could barely afford in the first place, which is absolutely insane and it's disgusting. And the government should be absolutely ashamed of itself for what it's doing to the most impoverished people. It's going to be the poor that are going to be hurting the most, and what exists of the middle class today, which is almost completely decimated. So we will continue to break down this issue. We will continue to go into it. But look, this is an inefficient way to basically just, steal money under the guise of saving the environment when government creates the most struggle within the environment in the first place, the biggest polluter on the planet, as I mentioned. So let's call it out. Let's go to the steps of the Manitoba Legislative Building if we have to and call it out. Yeah, again, we did it for years and we were somewhat effective, and we might have to be even more effective going forward. So thanks for watching, everyone. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson and John Sneisen signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth,
be the change.
Like what you see here at WHAM, don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so vastly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the ADL comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description as well as on the screen for you to scan, if you please. And don't forget to find us at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post in cryptocurrency, Steem that is. So don't forget to find us there. And until next time, this is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
you.